everyone, welcome back to my channel and to today's video. So I thought that I would just do a video about everything useful and interesting that I've learned since weaning my baby. So if you are new here, then my son Arthur is actually just about to turn 14 months old. And I'm still learning, so I just want to say that I'm not an expert by any means about weaning. There are still things I need to Google even at his age, even though he's 1, which is mad. But I just thought I wanted to share some really useful tips and hacks for you. So I really hope that you enjoy them. Don't forget to subscribe if you like to watch motherhood and mum life videos. And I'd really love to have you over on my channel. But yes, without further ado, I'm going to get straight into it. So before we get into the really interesting stuff, I just want to tell you some really basic information about a couple of things that I see people ask and question about and are confused about all the time. So the first thing is honey. Babies are not allowed to have honey until they reach 1 year old, and that is because it can actually cause something called botulism, which can actually be fatal for babies. So honey can be toxic for them. So just make sure, obviously don't give it to them as it is, but it can even be in things like soups and things. So just make sure that you read the ingredients and they cannot have any honey at all until they are 1. Another thing that you really have to be careful about and watch is their salt intake. So I will probably leave a link below to I think there's a NHS website that says about how much salt or sodium that they can have per day. So again, that's something that can cause them issues. Their kidneys are too young, I suppose, to be able to manage massive amounts of salt. It's not just because it's like unhealthy, their kidneys physically cannot take it. So you really do have to be careful. So don't add salt into anything you're making for them, and just make sure if you're giving them pre-made food, even like cheese, just make sure that you watch and are kind of managing how much salt that they have each day. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is cow's milk, because I think there just seems to be quite a lot of confusion, and I think maybe some people hear about it and they know the stuff that they remember, but they just kind of remember it the wrong way round, I've heard people say. So yes, babies can have cow's milk, but before the age of 1, they can only have whole milk in terms of splashes into their cooking, for example. So if you are making a sauce or if you're making a puree and you just need a bit of milk, you're fine to put some whole milk in, that's absolutely fine, but they cannot have it as a drink. So it does not replace breast milk or a bottle of formula milk. So if your baby is 8 months old, say, and you are looking at giving them a bottle of milk, it has to be formula or breast milk, of course. You cannot give them cow's milk as a drink or anything like that, but splashes in food and cooking are absolutely fine. So I've done that when I was making purees, or if I was making stuff for my baby, I would put in splashes of cow's milk. You don't have to use cow's milk, but do look into kind of, you can use like oat milk and things like that if your baby obviously is dairy intolerant or something. However, once they are past the age of 1, they can have whole milk as a drink. So you can give them a beaker of it, or a bottle if they're still having bottles. Ideally, babies should be off bottles by 1, but I know it's probably not that simple if your baby has had a bottle. So yes, they can have milk in cooking before 1, but not as a drink. After 1, they can have it as a drink, and any feeds that they have before 1 must be formula or breast milk only. If you think about it, cow's milk is actually made for baby cows, not baby humans. So it doesn't have the right kind of nutrients and things for their little bodies, because it's not actually made for them, if you think about it in that way. Before they are 1, they are mainly getting their nutrition from formula and breast milk, and obviously it's stepping up with the solids. And then from the age of 1, I guess kind of technically they should be getting their main nutrition from food, and then they can have drink of cow's milk. So I hope that clears a few things up, because I know that can be really confusing. Hopefully, I don't know if I've explained that clearly enough or not, but I will try and find some links that do explain it well below. Okay, so now that the boring bit is over, let's get into the more interesting stuff. So a really good tip that you can do, and whether you are doing traditional weaning, which is doing purees and then working up to textures, or whether you're going straight on with baby-led weaning where you're giving them finger foods straight away, a really good thing is just to batch cook, because it just saves you so much time and just like getting a good freezer stash in. So I did start off with purees, and so it's really easy. The really good tip is if you are making something for your tea, just make extra quantities of it. Whatever it is, obviously make sure it's suitable for your baby. But once you've got that extra supply, you can just blend it up if you're doing purees, and then just stash it in the freezer. And then it's just really useful. Sometimes you don't always have time to make something fresh, but if you've got something in the freezer, it's just much quicker and easier. If you are starting off with purees, as I said, you can put a splash of cow's milk in, but you could also put a splash of breast milk in. I think a lot of people start off with that I did as well, because obviously they are more used to the taste of breast milk rather than cow's milk. So just pop that in, and also it helps them get a bit of a taste for the vegetables as well, because you can just blend vegetables as they are and have that as a puree. But if it's got a bit of a taste of something familiar like breast milk, then that might encourage the baby to have it. If you are doing purees, then a really good thing is to use those ice cube trays. You can get some silicone ice cube trays, which I have spoken about before in my Weaning Essentials guide. So after you've blended the puree, you've obviously waited until it's cooled down, you can put it in your ice cube trays and into the freezer. But the next day, a really good tip is just to make sure that you actually get them out of the ice cube tray, so you free up your tray to make more when you want to. So just pop out the cubes and then just pop them into some sandwich bags. Obviously label them so you know what they are, because it does get really confusing. You've just got cubes of like green stuff in your freezer. Put a date on it, and then, as I said, you've got your ice cube trays free for the next time that you want to use them. Now, even if you aren't doing traditional weaning where you have been doing purees, I would suggest that pureeing food can still be useful. For example, if you want to add vegetables to a sauce, if you want to add fruit to their cereal, for example. So sometimes I still use pureed pear and just stir it in to my son's Weetabix. I mean, I do try and give him berries as well. It's not that I want to hide it to trick him, it's just to make sure that he does get fruit in, because he can be a bit variable, as I'm sure all babies are. Sometimes he might eat loads of blueberries in the morning, and then there might be some mornings where he doesn't want to touch them at all. But if he has, for example, some pear stirred into his Weetabix, then at least if he eats that, I know that he has had some fruit that day. Another thing, if you have been using purees, but now you've kind of moved off purees and you're on solids and you've got some in your freezer, don't worry, they don't have to go to waste. As I said, you can still use them within your cooking. What I also do, and this isn't just because I've got a stash left, I do actually still make vegetable purees because they've come in so useful. Obviously, vegetables are really important for babies to have too. So what me and my husband do when we are cooking a meal with lots of vegetables, we make extra. We blend it all up and freeze it as purees, like I said. It's not really runny, because it doesn't need to be runny. Kind of like mashed potato consistency. You sort of need a bit of potato to get at, if that makes sense. And I actually just spread it on toast, which does sound a bit random, but he does really enjoy it, and obviously it's a way of getting those vegetables into him. It's also really quick and easy, so if you want a quick lunch, but if we've got something like a vegetable puree in the freezer, which I can just put in the microwave for a couple of minutes, spread on some toast, and then he's got some good vegetables. You could also do the same with fruit. It kind of acts like a sugar-free jam, I suppose. So I think purees are still really useful. So a good little hack that I have learned and have used is just using one of those sticky hooks and putting it on the back of a high chair, and then that is the perfect place to store bibs, because I don't know about you, I've got a couple of bibs and I never really knew like where to put them, where to put the clean one. But now that I've got a nice little hook, it's just the perfect place to hang your bibs. Speaking of bibs, I would probably recommend that you buy 2 to 3 bibs. We like the ones which are coveralls, which mean they've got long sleeves, which I think you definitely need, elasticated sleeves, which you will need, and also they come over his front and then onto the high chair, so there's kind of like a well between his tummy and the high chair, and it just means any food it catches if it's like dropping out of his mouth. Or my son would, if he didn't have one of those bibs, he would just like put food on his lap and like he would stash it to his side and things, because he does do that now. But at least with these bibs, it just does definitely catch everything. So I would definitely recommend those types of bibs. After using those bibs a few times, I think it is very easy for them to start to smell, even though you may wash them regularly. So what I would always do and recommend is wash them at a high temperature, as high as you can. Also, just make sure that you're not leaving them damp. So once they're clean, if you can't get them dry that quickly, you know, whether it's on your air in your house or wherever, just make sure that you tumble dry and just get them as dry as possible, as quickly as possible. And since we've been doing that, so since we've been using a hotter wash and making them drier faster, we are finding that the smell is definitely not there anymore. So that is a really good tip too. Now this really isn't a hack as such, it's just a little tip. I would definitely recommend a splash mat, which I talked about in my Weaning Essentials guide. It's basically a mat that you put underneath your high chair, and it just helps, well, obviously catches all the food. Now, you don't have to buy a splash mat. Obviously, you could buy something similar. I've heard people talking about putting a shower curtain underneath, or even black bags. But I think definitely having something underneath the high chair legs is really good. Obviously, it protects your floor, and it kind of helps to contain it a little bit. Having said that, if you are in the kitchen and you've just got tiles, you may think it's not worth the money or effort of having a splash mat, but for us, when we've got a wooden floor in our dining room, it's been really, really good. As I have said before, weaning and feeding your baby is a very, very messy business, and once they are finished, food probably is everywhere. And I don't know about you, but when I'm trying to clean up my son, he will try and grab me. I think it's very funny to try and grab me and my clothes with his messy, sticky hands. So the best thing, which I've found to do, is one, to clean his Highchair tray first. So before I attempt to clean his hands, I get the tray clean first. So I wipe that down, and then I look at his hands, and then I wipe his hand nearest to me first, and then I wipe his other hand, and then I wipe his mouth after. Because I just find if you obviously clean his hands, he's going to put them straight back onto the messy tray. So definitely do the tray first, and then obviously just like the point of attack, his side nearest to me, I just make sure it's clean. So then when I'm doing the other side, if he is grabbing me with the hand nearest to me, it will be clean and I won't get messy clothes. I would also recommend putting food on your Highchair tray and not your plate, so I wouldn't worry about buying loads of these suction bowls and plates. I think they are useful and they definitely have a place, and I know they look very pretty, but definitely don't go buying loads and spending loads of money, because you may find that you don't use them that often or that well. Because for me personally, I find that if I put a bowl or one of those plates down, my son is just more interested in getting it off the tray rather than eating the food on them. So definitely just utilise your Highchair tray. It's much easier to clean anyway, and just put food straight on the tray. If you are looking at bowls, definitely try and get a shallow one so they can kind of use their hands to scoop it up. But don't worry too much. Babies will learn to use cutlery and bowls and plates. Don't be in a rush for them, especially before the age of 1, and even after that. They're just getting used to it, they're exploring it, and they're learning that it can be fun. And obviously, yes, that can be messy too, but that is the joy of it. Don't forget, baby-led weaning can also be the baby feeding themselves with a spoon, so it doesn't have to be, no spoons are involved at all. So do remember that one. But if you are doing traditional weaning where you are spoon feeding your baby, a really good tip is to give them a spoon so they can kind of play with that whilst you are offering them the spoon. I never wanted to trick our son and you kind of, distract him too much. I want him to be aware that we are trying to feed him and him to be enjoying it. But if you are finding giving them a spoon is just too much and they are fine with playing with a spoon, then that is a really good little tip. So a good little tip to always make sure that you do is roll up baby sleeves before you put the bib on. Because even though, yes, I recommend getting a bib with elasticated cuffs, is that the word? Elasticated sleeves, so that they're tight. Ideally, that would stop any food going up the bib sleeve, but it doesn't always work. Plus, if your baby's eating something really messy, like for example, pasta sauce, like tomato sauce, and sometimes it can actually seep through the sleeves a little bit. So, to stop your baby's clothes sleeves getting ruined by all these different stains of the different food that they might be eating, just make sure you roll up their sleeves before you put the bib on. It sounds really simple, but it's just something that you may not think about, and it's something that I've kind of learnt through lots of months of getting sleeves dirty, is just to do that little easy little trick. Now, I don't know about you, but I have loads and loads of muslin cloths. They are kind of an essential for when you are having a baby, but as your baby gets older, you'll probably find that you don't really need to use them as much. But don't worry, don't let them go to waste. You can use them for weaning too. Again, it sounds really, really simple, but it just might not be something that you've thought about. So weaning, as I said, is very, very messy. And obviously, baby needs to be wiped down afterwards. Now, don't get me wrong, I do use wet wipes. Yes, they're not very environmentally friendly, and yes, obviously it's a bit wasteful using that kind of thing, but sometimes it is just handy. They're already wet, they're right there. I keep the packet on the table and it is simple to use. But sometimes babies' mouths and faces can get a bit sore. It's not always that nice and pleasant to use wipes. We used to use water wipes, but they're very expensive. Then we got a cheaper pack just to use for hands and face, but then again they were kind of a bit chemically, so I just thought, why don't I just use water? So rather than use kitchen roll, which I started doing, you can obviously buy special little cloths. So I get a pack of 3 really, really fluffy and soft microfiber cloths from eBay. I did put them in my weaning essentials guide if you want to know what I'm talking about, but you can also use muslin cloths too, because obviously they are pretty soft. So just wet them under the tap and use that to wipe your baby's hands and face. And I know it sounds really, really simple, but again, it might be something that you haven't thought about doing. You could also use a muslin cloth underneath the bib. So as I was saying, sometimes bibs, if your baby is either getting really wet through dribbling water, because they do usually go through a stage of dribbling out water. That's just them like exploring, not because they don't know how to swallow. Or if they're having a really messy meal and then it gets wet, sometimes the food can kind of seep through their bib onto their clothes underneath. So what I have done a couple of times with my son is just put a muslin underneath his bib, and that just kind of acts as a layer, one, to stop any stains going on him, but also we were finding, because he was constantly like dribbling out his water all the time on purpose, he was getting quite sore kind of on this area here. So just having like an extra layer of material was stopping that happening. The very last tip that I have for you is, if your baby seems a little bit unsure about textures, they don't want to touch food, then a really good idea is to use some messy play for them. So sometimes when we were trying to give Arthur some food, rather than spoon feeding, we were giving him food on his tray, he would just not touch it. He would actively like flinch away. He would sometimes go towards something, like try to touch something, then just like flinch before he got there, or he would touch it and then would just like back away from it. Like, it really seemed to freak him out. But what really did improve things in that sense was just to do a lot of messy play and sensory play. So you may already do this, and I was doing it sometimes but not that often, but I was finding if I did it more and more, he was then becoming more and more used to feeling different textures, and then he wouldn't be so freaked out when it came to us trying to give him different foods. So I have made a video on messy and sensory play ideas, and there are some in there, but basically you can use things like lots of dry cereals you can get them to play with. You can use spaghetti, obviously it's cooked and then cooled down, and you can also dye it pretty colours as well. You can use jelly and like hide toys in it, and it's just getting them used to feeling these different like wet and slimy and cold and all these different textures, so that hopefully like the touch of these different foods won't freak them out so much. So those are all my tips, and just remember, I know at the beginning it can seem really overwhelming. There's just so much information out there, and everyone tends to do it different ways. You know, you're probably thinking, do I do it traditional? Do I do puree? Do I do baby led? Do I give like a combination of puree and finger foods? And you know, really there is no right answer. I think you just kind of have to do what is right for you. Obviously do your research and talk to other people, but just do what you feel comfortable with, and hopefully at some point you will be able to enjoy it. I definitely was very, very nervous at the start, and then as things got a bit easier and as Arthur has started to eat more and more, I definitely do enjoy it, and you probably will enjoy it. You know, you find different things, and as I said, there are still things that I need to Google and work out, and I'm still trying to think, you know, oh, like, have I given him enough fruit and vegetables today, or, you know, is he having like a well-balanced day, you know, in terms of like iron and protein and all that kind of stuff. But I just think we're all trying to do our best, and that is all we can do. But I really hope that some of these tips and hacks help you, and hopefully there was something in here that was a bit different, because I know I'm sure there's loads of videos about like weaning hacks and tips, but hopefully you have learned something a bit different and interesting today. But thank you so much for watching this video. I really do hope that you subscribe to my channel, and thank you everyone that has subscribed so far. As I speak, I'm on about 1,000 subscribers, which is just crazy. Like, I can't believe I've got that many people. Like, even like 100 is masses, so 1,000 just kind of like blows my mind. So yeah, thank you if you are watching this and you are subscribed, but if you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe to me. Join me here on my channel. I post all different things kind of related to motherhood, mum life, like cleaning videos, grocery hauls, lots of different stuff. And if you have any video requests, then please do leave them in the comments below, because I would love to hear them. I really want to hear from you and what you like to enjoy and watch from me. But yes, I will stop talking now. I hope you have a lovely day whenever you're watching this, and thanks for watching. I will see you very soon. Bye everyone.